All right.
Brilliant. So, can we begin? Can I first of all ask you about Learning Ally? Who are they and what do you do?
Yes, thank you so much, Martin. So, Learning Ally is a national nonprofit organization that is in the United States. And we actually this year are celebrating 75 years of being in existence. So,
Wow, okay.
that, yeah, that's a really long time. And what happened was 75 years ago, Anne McDonald was this individual passionate about literacy and helping. And she saw a need for veterans coming back from World War II who had been blinded in war. And they wanted to access their GI Bill. So Anne McDonald and some other women from her women's auxiliary group
Yeah.
in New York City started recording books on reel to reel tape that then was sent out for these veterans to access their GI Bill.
Wow. Okay. So you can see, I suppose, a clear link between that and neurodiversity and dyslexia in the present tense. So, how do you how do you create accommodations for dyslexics? Is it simply in audiobooks, or are there other ways that you work as well?
Yeah. So our anchor solution, the one that Anne and her group started 75 years ago, is the audiobook. Now, of course, technology has advanced. We're not sending out reel to reel anymore. It is all digital download with our library of over 80,000 human read titles. So
Wow.
it was in the 90s when we had this major focus on blind and visually impaired.
Yeah.
And in the 90s, it was this realization for individuals that were working at RFB&D, recording for the blind and dyslexic at the time, that started to realize students that are dyslexic, students that struggle with reading, this audio component was just a brilliant way to provide access to grade level learning for individuals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So really started, and that's when we were RFB recording for the blind,
yeah.
and then we added on and dyslexic in
Right.
the
Yeah.
1990s.
And so, I suppose one question that there might be is why would dyslexics need this? I mean, what's the state of the education system in America and is it state by state or city by city or is it national or if you can help us understand this a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. And you also asked about, what do we do? So
Yeah, yeah,
luckily the organization has also evolved. We changed our name to Learning Ally in order to be more inclusive of individuals and broaden our services beyond just recording things.
yeah,
So like that audiobook solution. For an individual that's dyslexic, we know that individuals that are dyslexic, this neurodivergence, that they are struggling with the phonological component of language.
yeah.
And so that discrete skill of being able to understand a grapheme representation, a letter representation, and the sound that it makes,
Mm,
there is a lot of work that has to be done through structured literacy that allows these students to map that sound to that symbol, and a lot of repetition needs to go into that. And so what's happening then is you've got students that are in all grades that have not been identified, that have kind of, hidden in the background of the classroom. They've coped. We don't have, there could be a knowledge piece missing on the part of our schools. They don't know what to do for students with dyslexia. So that audio component, what that does is lifts the cognitive load of decoding
yeah.
and allows that child to focus on comprehension, understanding, building background knowledge and vocabulary at grade level learning. Because here's one of the misconceptions, and Martin, you know this, is that students with dyslexia often are kind of said, oh, well, they can't get it. They can't read. They're not as smart.
Okay.
And self-esteem issues. We know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So getting access to the content these students realize I'm smart. I can get this. Now, I have to say it. I say it all the time. This access to content should never, ever, ever replace explicit instruction and learning the phonological code of our language. Right. We got to have both.
Yeah. And so I suppose one question becomes, do students get the same kind of learning from audiobooks as they would from reading? I mean, is there, what sort of is the evidence, or at least the anecdotal evidence?
Yeah. So there's actually some research that's been done out of University of California School, the Gallant Lab, where they have done fMRI imaging that shows here's the neural networks of the brain when reading from a paper book or a hard book, right? That's in my hands. And then also the way that the neural networking is working when you're listening to an audiobook. And basically what that research has shown is that our brain doesn't know the difference. So the lighting up of the neural networks of the brain, our brain doesn't know whether you're reading from a paper book or whether you are listening to an audiobook.
And I suppose that's because when you phonologically decode, you hear it in your head. And so you're learning not from what you're reading so much as from what you're hearing, in a way. And that's not from what you're seeing, but from what you're hearing. And that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
It helps dispel this myth. There is a myth out there that is so prevalent that says, oh, audiobooks are cheating. That's cheating.
Yeah.
It's, that's not really reading. And, we've got to dispel that understanding, especially in the technological age that we are in today.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, saying audiobooks isn't really reading is a little bit like saying Braille isn't really reading.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the American education system, does it provide for audiobooks? Is it audiobook friendly? I suppose it may depend on the area you're in, but in general.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've got to say, over the years, I've been at Learning Ally for 18 years, and it seems like I'm still answering some of the same questions, dispelling some of the same myths that have been around for 18 years. It's just about knowledge sharing. It's just about, everybody is at a different point in their learning journey. Yeah. And so I always like to remind individuals and dispel those myths and break that misconception, because what's happening is for students with dyslexia, we know the science tells us, science of reading, huge movement that's happening not only in the United States, around the world, that we need the language comprehension as well as word recognition, this multiplicative avenue that gets us to reading comprehension. And when you are working on word recognition, especially younger kids or older kids that have never had those foundations or are dyslexic, need more repetitions, then what do? I've got to give you access to the grade level content, because that comprehension, the vocabulary, all of those things that you need in order to keep up with grade level work.
Yeah. If you're spending all your cognitive power on trying to decode, you're not getting any comprehension at all. And that's just taking kids back a notch. You also talk about the science of reading, and you mentioned structured literacy. What's the position of structured literacy in the science of reading, and is it widely accepted, or are there other kinds of literacy instruction that some people might prefer over others?
Yeah, now structured literacy with a big capital S and a capital L, that is a coined term by the International Dyslexia Association. And so there are discrete components that make up a structured literacy lesson, focusing on, phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, phonics, all of these building blocks that need to happen in a very structured way. And this type of instruction, we know, is beneficial for many students. Now, I do want to point out, though, there are students that come to school, these little 4 and 5-year-olds that are coming into kindergarten, that are already reading, and we don't know what happened, that they are just reading. Those students don't necessarily need to be put through a structured literacy program, because they already know the code. They've figured it out on their own. They're already readers. We need to accelerate them.
Hinder their progress if they're able to do something, and then you say, right, now we're going to teach you how to do it. It might confuse them or something. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've got this small group of kids, but then that structured literacy for our K1 and 2 kids, as well as older students that are dyslexic, that struggle with reading, never had those foundations. Yes, absolutely. That's what we need to be doing in order to teach the code of our language, as well as, we can't forget it, because science of reading has kind of been synonymous with phonics instruction only. And that is so false. That we need to understand that it's also language. And I love where we're going as the research is going, is understanding that oral language actually just is the foundation that underpins and lifts up all of those discrete elements of reading instruction.
Well, it's really funny. I mean, I don't want to get philosophical on this, but there's a guy called Gilbert Ryle who wrote a book in the 1950s or 60s called The Concept of Mind. And okay, I don't believe in what Gilbert Ryle believes in. He was what they call a behaviorist. Doesn't matter. But he pointed out that when we learn to read, we read out loud. And we have to be taught to read quietly. We have to be taught to stop reading out loud. And actually, there's some evidence that says this isn't necessarily a good thing. Because, why are we teaching kids to read unnaturally almost? So, yeah, the oral part of language is incredibly important, even when reading, because the idea of reading out loud is quite a natural thing for a lot of people to do, certainly.
Well, and our brains are wired for language. Think about babies and the babbling that they do. And finally they realize, oh my goodness, this babbling turns into words. And I am affirmed with those words when my parents say, yes, that was a dog, so little kids that learn. And so this oral language component, which getting back to audiobooks, is for anyone that's dyslexic, struggling in reading. When I don't read, I don't have as many words as everyone else. I don't have as much depth and breadth of knowledge as everyone else. We've got to be able to douse our kids in words. I say sometimes, I fear that we are creating word famines instead of word feast. Like we've got to really just douse our kids in words. And then what we see is then when kids have the language, then when I come across that word and I'm learning to decode that word, the minute that I start putting those sounds together, saying that sounds, bam, yes, I know that word was vegetable. I know what a vegetable is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guessing that a lot of the time when we create these feasts, these word feasts, it's through the spoken word. Most of the words that I've learned have been through the spoken word. We don't learn words by reading them. We learn by conversation, by listening to people, by hearing how they're used. And so any audiobook complements that and it adds to that.
Absolutely. I love thinking about, and hearing from students and teachers. And one of the key things for students that struggle in reading, that they know from a very early age, hey, wait, that kid's getting it and I'm not. Maybe they can't name those things, define those things. And then this sense of shame, this sense of guilt starts to seep in. They don't know how to manage those emotions and feelings, but I know I'm lesser than other students in the classroom. And this sense of not good enough. I mean, we could tell story after story of kids that have sunk into depression, or I don't want to go to school, or I'm gonna feign sick so I can get out of certain reading exercise.
You're telling the story of my childhood, quite honestly. Yeah.
Martin. Yeah, exactly. And then when they realize, oh my goodness, I'm going to put this ear pod in, or whatever I'm using, headphones in, and I can listen to a story and I can understand it and I know what's going on. And when you ask me about theme and character development, I can answer those questions.
Yeah.
Then students realize, and not my words, but words of students, I realized I wasn't dumb.